I'm Steph.
And I'm Jeff. Each week, we review a film that's streaming on Netflix or Amazon Prime.
As writers, we'll deep dive into the hook, plot, characters, and ending to tell you if it's a good story.
Listen at your own risk. This review contains spoilers.
Now sit back,
relax,
and enjoy Stream On. On this episode, we'll be discussing The Man Who Fell to Earth, streaming right now on Amazon Prime. Thomas Jerome Newton is an alien who has come to Earth in search of water to save his home planet. Aided by the lawyer Oliver Farnsworth, Thomas uses his knowledge of advanced technology to create profitable inventions. While developing a method to transport water, Thomas meets Mary Lou, a quiet hotel clerk, and begins to fall in love with her. Just as he is ready to leave Earth, Thomas is intercepted by the U.S. government and his entire plan is threatened. So this movie is from 1976. It's directed by Nicholas Roeg. It's based on the 1963 sci-fi novel by Walter Tevis. The screenplay is done by Paul Meyersberg, and it stars David Bowie as our alien, Thomas Jerome Newton. Mary Lou, or Candy Clark as Mary Lou, who's this alcoholic hotel clerk. Rip Torn, who plays Professor Nathan Bryce. And Oliver Farnsworth, the patent lawyer, is played by Buck Henry.
Okay, so there are a few things I like about this movie. One is I really like the basic theme of this look at the corrupting effects of consumerism and basically the vapid nature of modern America. That people are just obsessed with instant gratification and nothing bigger than that. And it does a really good job of showing that. I mean, through the eyes of Newton coming in as an outsider and basically losing the thread on his entire mission. I like how the plotting is kind of all over the place. It is not a solidly plotted film. And we can get into that in the plot, but I actually like that. It comes across as more of a interestingly strung together collection of scenes and images and ideas, as opposed to like a really solid, coherent story. It doesn't always work, but in the hands of someone like Roeg, who likes to do these kind of movies and likes that kind of really blobby plotting, it actually, to me, works. So those are the basic reasons. I like the theme, but I also just like that kind of how it's written and how it's presented to the audience. It's not an easy film to get into.
I would have probably, if I had chosen this one, it would have been because I read the book, and and both of us have read this book, so I would have been interested to see how they adapted a book to film because I really liked the book.
I read the book after I saw them. I've seen this movie numerous times, and I read the book after I saw the film.
Ah, and I read the book before seeing this movie, so that might be why our enjoyment of this movie is different because I did not love this movie. I'll just be honest up front. So I struggled with what this film reminded me of. It is so strange. It doesn't feel like anything else. It took me a while to come up with something, and then I finally came up with what it reminded me of is the old 1990 Twin Peaks series. That's what this reminded me of because it also was so strange, had really disjointed plot that didn't quite get to where you wanted it to go. Like, are we ever going to find out who kills Laura Palmer? I don't know. And it just had these scenes that take place in this alternative world, like Twin Peaks did, whether it's on this guy's planet or in Twin Peaks, it's sort of this weird dimension. And also these strange scenes that take place in his head. And so it had that just weirdness and disjointed plot similar to Twin Peaks. And I also didn't love Twin Peaks.
But I just want to say that's interesting you pick that because it also has that idea of an outsider coming into an alien world. Agent Cooper is to follow this analogy, Agent Cooper is David Bowie's character. He is Newton. He's coming in, learning the rules of this new world and being drawn into. I had not thought of that, but I like that. That's a really interesting parallel to draw. I like that. For me, it's going to be something that I think at least people who are really into sci-fi will probably immediately go, oh, I know why. The Day the Earth Stood Still, the original one, not the Keanu Reeves remake. This film is a dark take on that. An alien shows up on Earth with a warning for mankind. Basically, if you come out into space and bring war with you, we're going to vaporize your planet. And we see how he kind of gets used to American life, but never is corrupted by it. He stays on mission. He too meets a sort of bad end. I guess I won't spoil a 75-year-old movie. I'll tell you what happens, but basically he delivers his message and then leaves. But it has those parallels. The idea of what an outsider coming into modern America, whether it's modern America in the early 50s or in this case modern America in the 70s, how they are affected by it. And in the case of the film that you remind me of, he's really not. Here, he's of course destroyed by it.
Okay, so let's get into the hook the first 15 minutes. So, did it grab you, Jeff?
It did. In the hook, you basically you see David Bowie arrive. You notice that he immediately is spotted by some mysterious dude in a suit, which is interesting. It kind of comes back in later. We get the idea that he is alien early on. The one thing that the hook does not do, you do not get an idea of exactly why he's here. That is explained much later, why he's on Earth. All you know is that he shows up armed with money, rings, and high-tech blueprints that he's going to have produced for something, for some purpose. You know what the blueprints are, sort of, but you don't know why he is, what his mission is. Is it exploratory, invasion, whatever? That's okay, because as the movie goes on, you realize that his mission to some degree doesn't matter. That's not really what the movie's about. If you're looking for, in that first 15 to 20 minutes or 10 to 20 minutes, whatever you want to define the hook as a solid reason why he has come to this planet, that is the one thing lacking. You just do not know that.
He shows up and he's kind of wandering through this old abandoned railroad area. That's where the lake was. And there's this strange guy staring at him up on a hill. And I'm like, what's this guy doing here? Is this like is that for later on? And later on they sort of tie it in with like I think it's the FBI that was like watching him. I think that was that guy that was supposed to be.
There is some entity or agency or something monitoring him and that does things, but I don't think they're ever actually identified who they are. In the book, I believe they are. In the movie, it's just sort of this amorphous other people. So, but they're aware of him from arriving from moment one.
And they're watching him. Yeah, I think that was the whole purpose of just that random dude on the hill, just that happened to be there as this guy crash landed. Like a little too coincidental. But they don't make a big deal of it. They like just show him and then they move on. He wanders into small town USA, and we know it's small town USA because there's this like drunk guy at like a dilapidated carnival, and it's just very very quintessential small town, and it's like this strange land he's in. You can tell he's not from these parts. He shows up at pawn shops and is selling these gold rings for whatever money he can get. And then you see that he has a bunch of them because, like, basically that's his way of getting cash on Earth is to keep selling these gold rings with the same story. It belonged to my wife or whatever.
Did you notice something odd, though? In the book, it's, I believe, just stated that these rings are his initial source of income. He goes to pawn shops and sells them. In the movie, though, there is a scene where he has like this huge wad of cash.
Right. I'm like, how did he get so much? Like, because these rings are only worth like $20, according to that one pawn shop lady. So the other thing is, you've got the traditional call to adventure that takes place, and that they do a good job with that. We meet Oliver Farnsworth, who's this nerdy patent attorney. I mean, we know he's a nerd because he's got these really big bifocal glasses that make his eyes look funny. um, and he spends lots of time reading through patents, and so the guy shows up, pays him in cash, and says, please read these patents. And by the time Oliver's done, he's like, wow, you've got like multi-million dollar patents here. I think there were 9 of them total. And that's his call to adventure. Like, take the job, basically. And, there wasn't too much resistance. There was like slight, and then he's like, okay, I'll take the job. And that's pretty much where the hook ends, is the patent lawyer taking the job. To patent these different inventions that this strange man that he doesn't know is an alien, but we obviously know is an alien. And I have to say, David Bowie, great choice. As much as this movie to me fell apart, they did a good job picking the actor. Like I like with David Bowie's like weird eyes where one pupil's bigger than the other. Like it just totally worked for me that they chose him for this part. Okay, plot and characters.
I like it mostly because of how the visual storytelling really emphasizes or reinforces the themes. You had mentioned Farnsworth. Well, early on, we see that uh, Newton, the Bowie character, gets motion sick in cars. Farnsworth mentions he doesn't drive. This movie is big on American iconography. The car is probably one of the quintessential American icons.
Yeah.
Stuff like that sets these characters as what as outsiders. Farnsworth doesn't drive himself. Bowie gets sick in cars. It's that kind of thing that's not really blurted out, but as you're watching it, you're like, oh, this is a way that Rogue is kind of going these visual cues that these people exist on the margins of society. And that's kind of what all the characters who cluster around Bowie are like. These are people who are not on the inside of society.
Right. You've got the hotel clerk, Mary Lou, who's like this kind of just struggling alcoholic, but she's got some smart things to say. And it's sad that she's lost herself in alcohol. So she's on the margins of society because she can't control her gin. But she does have these good moments where I liked that one scene where she talked about the trains, where she used to love taking the train and how it was, this great experience to be on the train and the food car and the scenery and this and that. And then she went on a train not that long ago and it was crowded and there wasn't the nice food car anymore. Like everything had changed. And she's like, it really ruined trains for me. It's something I used to love. And that's such a shame. And
This movie is definitely steeped in nostalgia. A lot of the comments on American society are basically how it's become at the time, when this was made in the 70s, become much more impersonal and very much kind of an in the moment gratification of desire.
that's what's happened to
Consumer
Candy's
oriented.
character, Mary Lou, is
Mm-hmm.
that she's just instant gratification with the gin, and she's drinking her life away. And it's sad because you see these moments where she's actually, pretty brilliant person, and she's got a lot to say.
If you look at the characters as more archetypes, right? So Mary Lou is kind of the cultural touchstone of America. The whole train nostalgia thing is like she's harkening back to like this was a time when things just the culture was better, but it's gotten worse, and now I'm just drinking myself to oblivion. Farnsworth is the guy who is superficially the insider, right? The successful patent lawyer. But like I said, there's some of the iconographic stuff, but also he's gay,
Hmm.
which in 70s America marked you as definitely as an outsider, right? Nate, the professor, doesn't again, if you're looking at these characters as archetypes, he is sort of that the technical American, the engineer and or America's brain, if you will, but he's saying the stuff I've been teaching my kids bores them and bores me. I need to find something new. That America, even in its academia, even in its science, has become buried under layers of just
Banality, yeah, and unoriginality, and he's so bored that he sleeps with his 18-year-old students in some really really weird sex scenes, with that montage scene with like the samurais, like where our alien Newton is watching the samurais, like a Japanese restaurant, and then it cuts to Professor Nathan Bryce having sex with one of his students in just a weird sex scene. It just was. I don't know. I didn't like it. It was just such a weird interplay between the samurai stuff and the sex scene. I call it the samurai sex scene, but it was odd. It was an odd way to introduce this guy's character.
well, it does show in like his early introductions. You have that which is a very actually destructive sex scene because
Hmm.
he literally is physically destroying things in the house. You get an idea of obviously why he's doing this because he's getting older, and that he keeps saying there's one scene where he's meeting with the dean of his school, and the guy's telling him you just need to teach this out of the book, and Nate actually says I'm younger than these people, and he means mentally, and but the way he's trying to but the initial way he's trying to show that is by having sex with teenagers, basically, who keep saying that how they think of him like, like you don't remind me of my dad.
I don't understand the point. Maybe there's some underlying message that I just missed, but what was the point of doing that violent sex scene montaged with the samurai scene?
Well, the intercutting of it is interesting. So when I was watching that, what I thought was that the violent sex part is pretty straightforward. Rogue obviously has some issues with sex. I mean, sex seems like it's another distraction. What you see in this movie is that after Nate kind of gives up on having sex with his students, he becomes much more focused. He basically moves from that, I'm going to try to maintain what youth I have or my sense of youth by having sex with, I'm going to actually get into more of the science stuff. But the interconnection of the two, I, I would say it's this idea that for Nate, sex has become as ritualized as that kind of samurai kabuki theater thing we see. The sex isn't so much about connecting with people, it's by going through the motions of something that he has been told or believes it gives him meaning. But it's really just a play. The samurai are supposed to be in the context of the play, are fighting, but as we see, of course, it's a play. They're moving slowly and stuff. It's supposed to convey whatever that particular play is about. But I think that's the main point of it, is that Nate got into this kind of ritual where it's not really about connecting with anybody, which goes back to why they later in the movie, as you pointed out, there's a scene of a number of him having sex with a number of different students, all when connect and they all blur into one, and it's all the same thing. They literally down to the lines each of them are saying.
I don't know. I think the samurai thing was unnecessary. I think you could have gotten to the point without cutting in the samurai thing, but
I will say this about this film before we get deeper in the plot or anything, is that to me it is a movie that rewards, and I assume you're going to disagree with this, but it rewards multiple viewings, because the first go through, there is a lot of stuff that comes across as very disjointed. And there are things in this movie, even with multiple viewings, it's like, why is that there? But that's why I find this movie also fun. Now, I don't know if this is the greatest movie ever, but I do like it because it does reward that kind of ruminations about it, right? It's like, what is this film actually about?
for me, the film, if I was to like give it a theme, it's like the danger of addiction and what can happen. Like this alien completely went off mission. He's supposed to bring water back to his dying planet, and instead he falls in with Mary Lou and starts taking to drink, and then he just becomes an alcoholic and totally goes off mission, and he also gets addicted to screen time. So there's like scenes where he's sitting in front of like 7 TVs, and I think they actually at one point it's 12 TVs. It's like a bunch of TVs, and he's like watching them all at once, and with his alien mind he can do that. But this poor alien's just like he needs to like limit his screen time. But yeah, he got addicted to screen time, he got addicted to alcohol, and it really ruined his greater mission to save his planet. And so that's the theme I took away from the movie, is it's really the danger of addiction and how it can degrade relationships.
I don't disagree with any of that. I think that is definitely one of the themes. To me, the primary theme, though, is how society crushes the extraordinary. It's kind of encapsulated in a painting that features briefly in the movie. Attention is called to it, but it's not like it's in every scene or anything. But it's called "The Landscape with the Fall of Icarus," and it is by Peter Bruegel the Elder, and it's from around 1560. And we see it when Nate is looking through a book of paintings that I believe is given to him by his daughter. It's basically this huge landscape with a bunch of people doing things, going about their daily business, and then you see Icarus in the water in the distance, one leg up, and no one notices that this guy who just flew has fallen here. Just as something extraordinary. They're all busy plowing and doing all their normal day shit. That is the central point of this movie, is that society is designed to crush individuality, or if not crush it, at least channel it into things that are seen as the norms. So anything that comes that challenges that becomes a threat.
Yeah, I could see us very much if we did have an alien on our planet poking and prodding at him, which they end up doing to try to figure him out. But I guess people that feel like they don't fit in society, they because society doesn't know how to deal with them, or they don't know how to deal with society, probably a combination, then they go towards unhealthy things like addiction.
Well, as I said, is that the addiction, though, is one of the social norms. It's not seen as, in American society, the things that these people do are not seen as abnormal. Too much TV, too much drink, random sex.
Right. Yeah, they fall towards normality by going towards the addictions, instead of staying healthier in their pursuits of extraordinariness. So however you look at it, as like whether it's trying to squish the extraordinary, or whether this movie is the danger of addiction to too much screen time and alcohol, I think both of those themes work, and they work together. There's just a lot that didn't work about the movie. For example, there were moments where, like, they were driving, where he and Mary Lou were driving to go to where they're going to build their house. And there's a scene where all of a sudden this pioneer family from the past sees him in the car, and he sees them, and Mary Lou's like, "What are you looking at?" But I don't understand the point of that scene.
The way I look at that scene is it's a more of a physical manifestation of this idea that the past is always with us, no matter how much we try to ignore it. And as an outsider, at that point, and this goes back to why he doesn't have this happen in the future as things progress, is that Newton actually is aware of that past still being there, while people like Mary Lou, who is, already a member of society and just doesn't see it.
But that the people in the past see them.
Yeah, I don't know. That was just weird.
That is the example of why I didn't like this movie, because they drop big things in like that, like a big concept like time travel, and then they do nothing with it. It just is there to be weird, and then there's no reward to that later on. It just and there's so many of that. Like, also, like the scene with his okay, all those weird scenes with his family on a Mars-like planet where it's obviously very dry, and he's saying goodbye to them, and there was that vehicle going back and forth, which I didn't quite understand, like him going to work or something. But there's I didn't quite understand where that was going, other than he's missing his family, and that eventually he makes this record for them, but of course they're dead. Like, he's missing his family, but he doesn't seem to care that much to save them, to save the planet. He'd rather go drink his gin.
Well, there are a couple of things about that. Is that I think that in part it is those scenes where they're just to establish that he does have a connection to his family. I don't think there's any like necessarily deeper meaning in that. The record, because it's the only way you can communicate with him. His ship was destroyed. He was held in captivity for decades. They might be dead. I mean, we know they're dead. He doesn't. He actually doesn't know they're dead. But part of it is just his futile attempt to say goodbye. I don't know. I
Yeah.
mean, that's why I didn't take that as odd. Actually, the alien sequences were the ones that made to me that they're pretty straightforward. It's like he has a family. It's on a dying planet. At the end, he knows he's failed.
Yeah, and some of that was, I thought it was just overdone. Like, there were too many of those scenes with the same, okay, here they are again with the family in like the skin tight suits, and they're like, little space packs going back and forth in this desert land. Like, it just got boring. There was too many of them.
And it works. I mean, it does show, alien world and all that, and he still has these thoughts about them. It's just he can't do anything about it anymore.
One other thing for someone that has read the book, is that they really changed the relationship between Mary Lou and Newton, right? In the book,
Yes.
they don't have a romantic relationship. It's much more of a friendship, and a codependent one at that, because of the alcohol stuff. But in the movie, they take it a step further and create this romance between them. I thought it worked better to not have the romance than to add it in, and I didn't feel there was great chemistry between those two characters. But what was your thought about, why they changed that core relationship from the book to the
Well,
movie?
part of it is that Rogue clearly is trying to draw a relationship between sex and distraction. Nate, the professor, becomes more technically savvy and more interested in science as he leaves sex with students behind. As Bowie becomes more sexually active with Candy Clark, he actually his mission starts drifting.
So sex and alcohol are both bad and distractions. Is
Pretty
that what we're
much.
supposed to take from it? Because none of the sex scenes were like, you didn't feel the romance, you felt the destruction in all of them.
Exactly. All the sex scene. I mean, literally, the last time he has sex with Mary Lou's character, they are shooting blanks at each other. It
Yeah,
is.
no, that was strange. And it was too long. That scene went on way too long. Of like, okay, we get that they're pretending to shoot each other during sex.
There are some scenes like that that, yeah, I was like, okay, wrap this up. I get what you're trying to do. I don't need this to go on and on.
Hmm.
But that's pretty much it. It's basically as he becomes more human, because we see what alien sex is like, and it's not human sex. Because there are scenes in the film where he's like rubbing milk on his mate or something. It's really weird.
Yeah.
But clearly that's supposed to be how these creatures are having sex, and it's not the way humans do. Yeah, so I think that's mainly it. I don't think there's anything really deeper than that. It's just another one of these addictions, distractions. It's like TV. It's like alcohol. It's like materialism. It's just these things that detach you from creativity.
To me, I mean, there's nothing inherently wrong with sex or alcohol. When you do it in excess, right? And it becomes something that you're addicted to, that's when it's gone off course. But I think for him, he never tied it in that you can have a healthy relationship with either. It was always, it's like, it's gonna be destructive. And that's not true. Maybe it is for these outcasts. Like maybe he was trying to make a point that for people that are outsiders and struggle to connect, if they go to addiction, it's always going to be destructive instead of like the healthy relationship with either of those joys in life.
Well, I don't think that Rogue is literally saying that every time you have sex is part of a destructive distraction from your true purpose. I think his point is bigger. It's this idea that these are the things that American society is just tossing at people and saying, this is what makes you successful. This is what is good. And that people are, that distracts you from the more important things. But I
Hmm.
don't think I mean, these are the sex and alcohol and stuff are this kind of the obvious things. Because it definitely gets into this entire materialism idea. If you look at his quote unquote home on the alien planet, it's this tiny little monorail.
Right. Versus on Earth, it's like this like crazy looking. It reminded me of Graceland. Have you ever been to Graceland and just like the jungle room? It was like the jungle room. Every room was like the jungle room in his home. It was overkill. But I guess I could see that underlying sort of like more is better. And that you have to have these like elaborate rooms with all of these things in them, and it's just the idea of just excess, and it doesn't make you happy. He's just stuck miserable in the excesses of his apartment with all these crazy rooms, all this stuff, and all this wallpaper. So I can see that theme. That makes sense. I just found those sex scenes so painful to watch.
None of the sex scenes in this movie are in any way erotic or stimulating. They're all kind of unpleasant.
They're unpleasant to watch. So just if
Yeah.
you want to watch this movie, get ready for that. I also felt like there was these moments where he would have drunken images of these floating bodies going around, and I didn't quite understand what that was about.
I think that was the alien sex scenes. That's what I took that as.
Oh, those are the alien sex scenes, those floating bodies in the water. Oh, okay. Okay. I didn't quite get there with that, but gotcha. Yeah, okay. Yeah, there's a lot of things you just have to guess about this movie is why is this scene in here? And I mean, yeah, if you like stuff like that where you sort of have these mystery scenes and they don't really deliver on anything or you have to guess how they deliver, then this movie could work for you. But I would like to have more reward from watching those scenes and understand how it all ties in, and I never quite got there.
Well, one of the things it's interesting you mentioned because we'd mentioned when we first started this episode, we talked about when he first arrives on Earth, some dude in a suit is watching him. That's one of those
Right.
things that it's heavily implied that whatever group I'm just going to say the government, it may not be, knows he arrives, lets him do his thing until it becomes a threat, kidnaps him basically, experiments on him probably pointlessly, and then just kind of forgets about him and abandons him when he's no longer an issue. And it's a weird thing because there's really no explanation as to why they're doing this, who
And
these
why they're
people are.
abandoning him at the end. Like, are they trying to
Right.
get technology out of him? Are they trying to see if the aliens are a threat to Earth? Like, yeah, you never get any of that. There is something that diverts from the book where when they're experimenting on him, he's like, "Don't touch my eyes, don't touch my eyes." And in the book, it's much more serious. In the book, what
Yes.
happens is they do his eyes anyway. They experiment on his eyes, and because X-rays, he doesn't respond well to X-rays, right? So he goes blind. Because I believe it's X-ray in his eyes makes him blind in the book, but in the film, like you're expecting the same thing to happen, or I was because I read the book, and all it was now my contacts are permanently affixed to my eyes, which was to me a total letdown. It would have been more interesting to stick with what the book said and make him blind. Why they didn't, I don't know.
I am shaking my head. I don't understand why they changed that. It doesn't add anything, and it actually detracts from some of the creepiness of the end of the book, because yeah, I
Yeah,
agree that that was a
it makes
weird
him
change.
sadder. This sad, blind, drunk alien that, never makes it back home and makes this obscure record so that hopefully his wife and kids will hear it on their planet. So yeah, I maybe they just wanted him to see so he could do that weird sex scene with shooting the blanks. I don't know.
Not everything in this movie works. That is a weird change, one that detracts from the power of the ending of the book. There are some scenes with one of the tertiary characters is played by Bernie Casey. He's like this kind of coordinator of these this government activities, who briefly shows up like early in the movie, and then there's like kind of an extended scene of him having sex with his wife, and then but he's such a tertiary character, it's unclear why Rogue decided to have multiple scenes with him later on. There's a bunch of things like that where it's like, even as someone who's seen this and likes this movie and likes to dissect it, there are scenes that are just like, what does this have to do with
It
anything?
had nothing to that one character. Yeah, it really didn't have to do with anything. You could have totally taken him and his wife out.
This is one of those movies that, as you're at least as I'm watching it, clearly I like it a lot more than you, but there are moments I'm like, this needed another rewrite. Needed somebody else to come in and like a second screenplay writer to go, yeah, this scene doesn't make any sense and doesn't add anything.
Yeah, tie your loose ends together. As a writer, that's your job. This movie is like
Mhm.
it didn't tie its loose ends together. It plopped in all this stuff and never connected it, and then you're left at the end just to me feeling really dissatisfied because there's just all these loose ends hanging out.
I think there are fewer loose ends than you might identify, but I agree that there are some definite plotting issues. But as I said at this onset, one reason I picked this is that this is one of those movies with a really loose plot that to me actually works.
Yeah, I think this is a movie. It's like it's something you're gonna love or you're gonna hate. It's like it's not something that people will find as like a mediocre. This is one where you're either gonna have like fans that becomes a cult classic and love it and watch it over and over again, or people like me that are like not worth a watch. So let's talk about the ending. So basically, what happens is, he never gets home to his planet. He doesn't accomplish his mission. That's pretty much the ending. It's just sort of sad. He lost his way.
One thing about the ending I thought was really fascinating is that the movie itself, and the movie does play with time in interesting ways, is that it's clearly supposed to be set initially like in the 70s or maybe 80s, right? I mean, it's filmed in the 70s and it clearly looks like the 70s. Even though the movie by the end is like 20 or 30 years in the future, it does not look any different. Even the stuff that, because they make a point that he one of the technologies he introduces is a new sort of sound system that uses these little metal spheres instead of albums. But at the end, when Nate finds his album, it is just vinyl, and it's like his everything he did had no impact basically. And it goes back to that painting. It's like he crashed to Earth and no one notices because everyone's too busy just going about their lives.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't anything that impactable that moved society forward. Like there was no big space launch. Like I was waiting, like where's this spaceship he's gonna build? There was no big space launch. There was
Well,
nothing
that's the
like that.
interesting thing too, is that in science fiction films, when an alien race, or books, or whatever, when an alien race brings something, often it's like some sort of world changing technology, right?
Right, it's like Contact. They're gonna build this, thing that's gonna take them to the, alien planet or something.
Here, it's just consumer products,
Yeah.
which is probably more realistic, but still, it's
But
just
but
like,
but his goal was to somehow figure out how to bring water back to his planet, so he would have had to build a ship to get the water back, right?
he does build a ship
Yeah.
and they blow it up.
Yeah, exactly. Like it doesn't go anywhere. We don't get the big,
Right, and
launch.
the government, I think there's one of the guys blowing up says, "Why do they waste money on these things anyway?"
Yeah, right. It's the classic why waste money on NASA when there's people starving. There's problems here on Earth. Let's focus on that instead of the mission to Mars or mission to the moon or whatever. Mm.
For me, it's like it's a fascinating way to look at America and American culture. What's your favorite thing then?
I guess my favorite thing about it is the message, the warning about addiction, that too much screen time, bad. Destructive sex, bad. Too much alcohol, bad. Like, I thought it did a good job showing the dangers of anything in excess and what addiction can do to destroy someone. So I would say that to me is the best thing about it is that message. What about you? What did you like best?
The thing you probably hated the most. I like the plotting. I thought that it worked for me, and it worked as this kind of take on America and take on modern society and the problems in it. I'll give a nod to David Bowie. I think he was good, but really that worked for me. Just how Rogue used this as a tool to dissect culture, which I think worked was brilliant. It just worked really
Hmm.
well for me.
What did you like least?
Candy Clark, her her acting, and she's not a bad actress, but man, her acting was so. I don't know what they did or what her instructions were, but maybe this is her voice, but I could not stand that character. And not the I take it back, not the character. I could not stand the way she portrayed it. It was just really grating. And she's integral to the story, so this is not one of those cases where you could say, "I just cut that character." I would just say a different performance would have helped a lot. Not and something you had mentioned really quickly about the source material. I did prefer, even though I understand why Rogue did what he did, I did prefer how she is portrayed in the book as more of a middle-aged woman who sees Newton as more of this broken bird that she's going to help, right?
Hmm.
And I thought that was I think that actually works better as that character. So there you go.
Yeah, and it wasn't. This was she needed just as much help as him, and it was this very codependent thing. And so yeah, I liked least kind of similar, but like it was the sex scenes between Newton and Mary Lou. I couldn't stand them. They were just cringeworthy. I mean, even if you had like a good one, and then later it became destructive. Okay, I could get that, but they were just bad. And I like a good sex scene. Who doesn't? So yeah, I was just yeah, they're not pleasant to watch and I didn't like them. And I know they did the director designed them not to be pleasant to watch, but it'd been nice to get at least one good one in there. The chemistry just wasn't there. And that goes back to, maybe her acting too in this character role.
Yeah. So,
Um
was there anything else you wanted to add about this movie?
no, I think I'm ready for my final analysis of this one.
I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 pandas. I think it's a really good film, a very interesting movie. I agree with your statement earlier that this is one of those films that works. It's going to work for some people. A lot of people are going to watch this and just go, "Why did I just spend 2 hours watching this?" This is not a movie to put on in the background. This is a film you have to pay attention to.
Yeah, you do.
So I would still obviously recommend people watch it. There you go.
Yeah, so I
4 out of 5.
am definitely on the other side of that
Yeah.
spectrum. I gave it a 1 out of 5. It was too long, disjointed, the plot didn't connect, the character chemistry wasn't great, the weird sex scenes. I mean, it gets a 1 because of the message, the warning about screen time and alcohol and the danger of addiction. So I give it a point for that. But other than that, to me, this is a pass. I wouldn't spend 2 hours of my life watching this one again.
Okay. Thank you for listening to Stream On. Join us next week when we'll be reviewing The Runaways, currently streaming on Netflix. Stream On is a production of Steph and Jeff Writes Media. Reproduction of this podcast without written consent is prohibited. All rights reserved. 2020.